Live from Chattanooga, Tennessee, it's Nooganomics with David Tulis.
We're brought to you by Trade Bank of Chattanooga, the smarter way to barter to improve your cash flow, trading among 400 local businesses, great and small, in every field, national economy and local economy. Learn more by calling Jürgen Mutz, the German with the southern twang, at 877-2202. That's 877-2202. Also, if you have a cell phone that needs repair, make sure you contact Cell Surgeon next to the old Chicago's Pizza in Northgate Mall. The Cell Surgeon number is 668-0100. That's 668-0100. There is an alarming story published this morning at Chattanoogan.com and possibly at other outlets affecting the interests of a county commissioner. County Commissioner Greg Beck owns a house, and in this house here in Chattanooga in East Chattanooga lives his granddaughter, Jessica Riley. Commissioner Beck, welcome to our show.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, bring my listener up to date as to what happened at that house very, very recently, early Wednesday morning.
Well, to begin with, everything I say wouldn't stand up in court because it's going to be hearsay. It's going to be her rendition of what happened. And I bet you if you interviewed police, there would be another story. But while I was on the dais yesterday, I got a call that the term we use in our community is bum rush. I got a call that my home where my granddaughter lived was bum rushed. I said, what in the world is going on with that? So after we got down and did some investigation, we went out to talk to my granddaughter, her dad and her mom and her husband. And we all sat down and talked. Well, the story she gave us was that she heard this loud bam on the door. Bam, 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 bam. Well, she thought it was her husband playing games because he had just left and was taking some kids, the other two kids, to school. And she opened the door. As soon as she opened the door, they barged in, and she counted 8 police officers. They barged in and said they were looking for this Tierra Tony. She says, well, I'm not Tierra Tony. And without search warrant or anything like that, 2 went upstairs, 2 went downstairs in the basement, 2 went in the den, 2, 4, 6, and 2 stood there and interviewed her. Well, the children were traumatized. They were crying. She has 2 small children who were there at the house with her because they're preschool age. And in fact, they're pre-kindergarten age. And so they were there at the house and they were crying. These burly police officers standing all over the place, invading the space. And so they began to tell her, well, and demand her ID. Now, she's in the house. I don't know why she had to show ID, but she's in the house demanding ID and separated her from the children. One officer stayed with the children, they're crying and going on. One officer follows her upstairs looking in her belongings as she searched for her ID. Well, she's naturally nervous. And so she finally found something. And then when she came back downstairs, she said a female officer who was with them, she was the one that was doing the bullying. She demanded that my granddaughter confessed that she was the one. They had a photo with them. And
of the woman they were looking for.
This lady was still trying to say that my granddaughter was the one. Now, what ticked me off about the whole thing, and I know how that can be, there can be a mistaken identity, mistaken in the address and all of that. I've been around. I used to work at the sheriff's department. But the bullying that went on at that moment between this female officer and my granddaughter was very calm. Because number one, she has support. She has family support. Number two, she knew she wasn't guilty. And the woman demanded, she said, you look at me, look at me, look at me. Look at me in the face and tell me you're not Tierra. She said, no, I'm not. I'm not her. And so as time went on, this girl, Tiara, is 5'11". My granddaughter is 5'2". This girl, Tiara, is a lighter complexion than my granddaughter. My granddaughter is a more of an ebony complexion. And she's there with 3 children, fixing baskets, handouts for the church to give to inner city kids this weekend for Halloween. And here we are with policemen all outside, all inside, all around behind the house, looking for somebody who committed a misdemeanor. I mean, I thought that was really overdone. I thought that was an overreaction, and I thought the way she did it, I thought was really non-professional. Now, the lead officer was the one who called off the whole thing, and I commend him. When I find out who they are, I will commend him and congratulate him on his professionalism. But he looked at the situation and said, no, she doesn't fit this description. And that's who called the whole thing off.
Well, a couple of questions come to mind right offhand. Commissioner Beck, this is David Tulis. We're talking with Commissioner Greg Beck of Hamilton County Commission, and he is describing a kind of a raid, if you will, against a house of which he is the owner. Living in that residence is Jessica Riley, his granddaughter, and her husband, and several children. And this occurred Wednesday morning. What was the misdemeanor alleged purportedly of the woman being sought by this large contingent of uniformed officers? Tiara Toney, who's 5'11" in height. Do you know anything about what she is alleged to have committed, Commissioner Beck? Theft. Okay.
It was theft. Yes.
Was a warrant?
Apparently,
was a warrant shown for her arrest?
Yes. Yes. Apparently, this is a time for a roundup, and I talked to Internal Affairs, and apparently this is a time for a roundup. And there are several agencies involved: the CPD, Red Bank, and the Sheriff's Department. These agencies are involved in these roundups, and apparently that's why there were so many officers. It's supposed to be a six officer team, but that was about 12 or 14 guys that were over there, according to what the report was. And it was just a whole line of police cars over there in front of my house. The community not knowing what's going on over there. And that's a very close community, and they have a community organization. And we've got to appear before the community organization and clean it up for my grandchildren over there, because the people, normally they would think, well, there's some kind of drug thing going on or some kind of criminal activity going on. And I thought it was just overkill. Whoever this person is, what I understand is the department, the Sheriff's Department, the Fugitive Division, Hamilton County Fugitive Division, handed out 100 warrants. And this Tiara person was one of the warrants. And so they use these warrants and go around and take the previous address of the people that have been arrested and have a warrant out on them. And apparently she gave that address. And so that's how we fell into the net. But all of it is forgivable, but the bullying part. Now, that's going to be my granddaughter's word against the officer's word. And I know what the code is out there, and it's not going to be the same story.
Were there body cameras on any of these officials? What? Were there body cameras on any of the invading officers, Commissioner Beck?
I don't know. You'd probably have to ask Internal Affairs or ask somebody else. I don't know of any body cameras. She didn't tell me there was any body cameras. I think we need them. And if the sheriff ever came to us asking for body cameras for the county, I would certainly be an advocate for that.
Well, let me ask you a question.
It was at that moment.
We're talking with Greg Beck. Commissioner Beck, let me ask you a question about advice. Your daughter has had an experience, and I think she learned something about exercising her rights, the rights of a property owner. And before she let them, before she stepped back, that first slight step back to allow the officer into her house, she should have asked one question. And what was that? What would that question? What should that question have been? Do you suppose?
Yeah, I think what I would have done, and my wife would have been probably dealt differently with it. She would have said, "What do you want?" And they would have said what they wanted.
Well,
she would have said, "Well, do you have a search warrant?"
There you go, bingo. Okay, so the question that your granddaughter, dear Jessica Riley, should have asked is, "Do you have a warrant?"
Yes.
Would that, in theory at least, have prevented the invasion of her house by these well-armed, tough, body-armored officers?
Well, she should have asked that, but we're dealing with professionals here. They should have produced one. It's not on her to ask. It's on them to produce.
Well, I'm going to have to beg to differ with you. It seems like if she had said, "Show me your warrant," they would have retreated, because not having one, they would have said, "Well, we're looking for so-and-so," and Jessica would have said, "Well, I'm not her. She's not here," and gone back into the house and shut the door. They have to get a warrant to go in. And so they would have had to double check their paperwork, since they had only a warrant for an arrest of a person, not a warrant to search a particular address. Or did they have a warrant?
Okay, well, that may be the law, but the way I understand it, and what I would have done is said, I'm Greg Beck with the Sheriff's Department. I have a warrant for this particular person.
Well,
when she opened the door, they just walked in.
Well,
and they feel like
maybe
they can
that was
that
the
here
warrant
in the urban community. I'm sure they do. I'm sure they feel like they can do that.
Right. Well, if you have a warrant for an arrest of a person, and then that you think that person's in that particular address, then I think they did have a warrant. So the question could have been asked, but the answer would have been, yes, we have a warrant for Tierra Tony, and we're coming in. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. So mm-hmm. they were there under warrant, but so the grief is not as bad as I'm suspecting. I'm guessing.
Yeah. That was certainly a lesson learned, and of course. She was there, and they came in, and that was a lesson learned for that particular part. But I don't think the kid being traumatized, and I don't think walking all over the house was warranted. And I don't think she being bullied by that female police officer, I don't think that was warranted.
Well, the question I have, Commissioner Beck, is: did the warrant for the person allow the officers to search the premises? If they had the person they thought was their suspect in view, that is to say, your daughter, your granddaughter, if they think they've got her, why do they have to search the building?
They thought was a suspect.
Well, they were confused in who they were.
If you got a picture in front of you, does all black people look alike or something?
Well,
you got a picture right in front of you.
Yeah.
You thought that she was somebody else.
Well, I wonder why these officers went searching the house, because that's a separate issue. They have to have a warrant to search the house, and access to the house for the person. I don't think grants authority to search the premises if the person's in view. In fact, standing in front of them, or so they thought.
So they thought that was the person in view with a picture in their hand. You think they thought that was the person?
Well,
you and I both weren't there, but we're just hypothetically talking. I'm sure. You think that they thought that was the person, and they got a picture right in their hand?
Well, you're saying they should have walked out immediately when they saw up close your granddaughter, Jessica Riley, realizing that she did not look like Tierra Tony, and they should have walked
then
out.
They should have asked, does Tierra Tony live here? Then she would have said, no, I live here with my husband and my children. And they would have said, well, we got a warrant for her arrest. Can we look around? She would have said, yeah, you can look around. There's no Tierra Tony here. But to just assume walking up the steps and walking up on the porch, knocking on the door, to assume we got you, and she comes to the door. Oh, yeah, you're the one. I don't get it.
Well, let me ask Commissioner Beck. We're talking with Greg Beck, the county commissioner, who's telling us of a grievous police action against a family member without seeming justification. What is your impression of the relationship among Chattanooga Police Department officers and people in neighborhoods?
I don't have a comment on that. It could go either way. I don't know what's going on in people. That's why I teach in my church. I teach children. I teach on my any kid that I come in contact with, cooperate with the police, because you have no idea what they have in their minds. They have a gun on, and they have what they believe is the government behind them, and anything could happen. If my daughter would have been belligerent, she would have been no doubt handcuffed and taken, drug out of there, and my great-grandbaby is laying there crying, and would have been taken to the facility over here for children. So that thing could have gone another way.
Well, may I ask you a question, Commissioner Beck?
People have to be taught right. And I don't care what the relationship is. If people respond right, I think they can save a lot of trouble. So she responded right.
Yes, you did. But the lesson you teach children at church, Commissioner Beck, is the lesson is you be compliant and cooperative and polite. But there's another lesson that prevents the people in Chattanooga from being slaves and slavish, and that is you have rights, you have constitutional rights, and you need to say, show me your warrant. By what authority are you here? That's not defiant. That is not wicked to say those things. That is really encouraging people to believe in law. And so the lesson is be compliant and cooperative.
Let me differ with you on that.
Go ahead.
Because the officers think that they really don't have to comply sometimes to it's according to what community you're in, and this is my opinion, of course. So you can, this is my opinion. It's according to what community they're in, whether they feel like they have to comply with any of that or any of those questions or not, because I work in the court system, and I know a lot of people come into court and say they ask officer for information, and the officer don't give it to them. So that thing can go either way. I'm not going to say that, you have rights. You have that. They might teach the rights. But that doesn't mean all the time that they're going to be, you're going to get the right response when you ask. Sometimes you ask an officer, what is your name? She asked the female officer, what is your name? And the female officer mumbled her name going out the door. So you see what I'm saying?
Yes,
she
sir.
actually did say it, but she didn't say it clear enough so that my daughter could identify her and we could get to the bottom of it.
Well, Commissioner Beck,
we will get to the bottom of it. We'll find out who that was, and of course she'll say she didn't bully her. That's the way it is. Hey, man, we're in America.
Well,
we're in Chattanooga.
Well, Greg Beck, we want to continue following the story, and we thank you very much for chatting with my listener and me. Appreciate the call and the time for the interview, Commissioner.
All right. Thank you.
This is David Tulis. We've been talking with Commissioner Greg Beck, and he's a Christian man, teaches Sunday school, and he, in his dealing with young people, he reminds them that they need to be courteous, respectful when dealing with the law, dealing with the man. But the question I raise is that the whole lesson? There really needs to be more lessons, and perhaps Sunday school is not the place to teach them. And that is the proper, polite, but belligerent assertion of a right. Because if you don't have the claim of a right, if you don't assert the right, you in fact don't have it. So in the scene that we had depicted for us by Commissioner Greg Beck, County Commissioner Greg Beck, in a house that he owns, which is occupied by his granddaughter Jessica Riley and her family, there is a warrant involved. The warrant was for a woman of the same race, but clearly not the same person. And the police officers, a dozen of them or so, kind of rushed into this house, searched the house, made demands upon the occupants, made demands that the occupants show their IDs in the house, though they had a photograph of the person they were seeking, of the defendant, a woman who's of a different name and quite a different height than Commissioner Beck's granddaughter. And yet they barged in based on the warrant for the person, but then proceeded going well beyond the scope of the warrant, which is for the person herself, not searching grounds, not looking through lingerie in the drawers and flipping through family albums and whatnot, all that may have been done by the two upstairs, the two down in the basement, the two in the living room, and searching a house and demanding the occupants identify themselves and show official papers. Show official papers. And this is exactly the kind of thing that you, my listener, need to be concerned about. And the fact that it has happened to a family member of a county commissioner, I think, heightens interest in this story. We need to come to an end of occupation. There needs to be local economy and a free market. We need to have comity in our social relations, not belligerence in our social relations. And so he made a kind of a startling point that depending on where you live, you have rights. So if you live in a lower stratus neighborhood and you're a person of color and you're a black man, you don't have rights because, well, any talk about your rights is just so much smarmy BS. We will ignore it. But if you're a white guy like me, in my neighborhood in Saudi Daisy, well, I can assert rights and not be pounded to the ground. If that's true, if Commissioner Beck is right about that, then we really have a very evil stratification in Hamilton County and Chattanooga. We don't want to have that. We want to have a free market, and we want to have where the people of our city don't live in fear, where if the officer needs to come in, he has a warrant to come in, he has a warrant to search. If he has a warrant for a person, that he show it, and that he make every effort to not offend the peace and tranquility of the home owner, in this case, the resident, Jessica Riley and her small children, who were all weeping as the officer stood staunchly, stalwartly on the carpet there next to the coffee table and filled up the room, taking the oxygen out of the room. If you have rights, you have to assert them. And the Sunday school lesson is be compliant, be polite, be respectful, say sir to the officer. But somewhere, somehow, there needs to be another lesson taught. And Greg Beck is very concerned that this lesson, I think, be taught. And that is, you have rights. You have to be what's called a belligerent claimant in person. Belligerent claimant in person. Belligerent means you're fighting, okay? A belligerent person is making war. He's making war, in this case, not to be unkind to the officer, not to give the officer a bad day. He's making war to defend what God gave him and what our constitutional government gave him or gave her. And that is, you can't act against me without probable cause. You can't search my car without probable cause or without consent. And I'm not giving consent. I don't give consent. I make no statement apart from my attorney. Don't ask me any questions. I make no statement. Have you seen me commit a crime? Am I a suspect in a crime? Are you looking for me? Do you have probable cause to stop me? Do you have a reasonable suspicion? These are the questions that you, my listener, that Jessica Riley, Commissioner Greg Beck's granddaughter, these are the kinds of questions that we need to have kind of in our mind. We need to kind of steep ourselves in this line of thinking. Not that it's not unkind, okay? This is what we have a duty to do. We, the citizenry of Chattanooga, of Hamilton County, you in your place, if you, my listener, are traveling from a far place, you have the same rights. You have to assert them. It's not evil to assert your rights. It's not hurting anybody to assert your rights. When the officer goes into command mode on his voice, right? You will step aside. You will get out of the, when he's doing that, that's just an act, okay? That's just an act to bully you. Do you have to be afraid? Well, of course you're afraid, but I would suggest that you think about not being afraid. Say, I'm an innocent person. I'm traveling here, or I'm living here. There has to be authority for this to happen to me. To be waylaid, to be harassed, to be stopped, to be pressed aside, to be demanded to show my ID, there has to be a cause. And I want to see the warrant for this. What warrant do you have? So that's the question. You could say something like, officer, I maintain all of my constitutional rights at all times, and at no time do I waive any of my constitutional rights. Do you understand that? Ask the question. If it's a yes or no answer. If he says yes, then you're making progress. If he says no, then that's evidence against his incompetence. This is David Tulis.